What happens when you give a blown 64 Corvette to a 16-year-old kid for his birthday? You're about to find out. If you're like me, then cars play a pretty big part in your life. It's more than just a hobby. And I've got the car that started it all right behind me right here, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. The car is a 1964 Chevrolet Corvette coupe. It has a lot of history right here in Dayton, Tennessee. It has a lot of history with our family. And that goes back to the mid-80s, at least in our family. And dating back to its history here in Dayton, it goes back to about 1966. Before that, it spent some time in Indiana, and then it came home to Dayton, Tennessee, and stayed here for the rest of its life, and I don't intend on changing that anytime soon. So the car was originally bought in Lawrenceburg, Indiana by Wilbert Leisring. He only owned it for just a little while, actually just put about 1,500 miles on it. The second owner was John Barlow, also from Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and he didn't put very many miles on it either. Having a 411 gear means that you're not going to get out on the interstate and take long trips in this car. And if you do, you're going to have to make several stops along the way for gas and just to let the thing cool off and let your ears kind of calm down a little bit from all the noise that goes on at 3,000 plus RPM. So that's exactly what John Barlow was doing. He was on the road and happened to stop at a friend's house he had served in the U.S. Air Force with, and that friend was Freddie Best. And Freddie lived in Dayton, Tennessee, and just happened to stop there for the night, stayed overnight, hopped in the car the next morning to take off to finish his trip, and the car wouldn't crank up. It was the transistor ignition had gone out, and Freddie had kind of worked it out with him to give him a car to drive, and Freddie ended up keeping the Corvette. So Freddie was pretty wild behind the wheel. He drove this thing hard, and he wrecked it a few times. And in some of the pictures you'll see that the front bumpers are gone. They've modified the front end a little bit, and they've put scoops on the hood. Just some things along the way to make repairs and do a little bit of upgrading in the process. So eventually the car had a bad crash, and it destroyed the front end, it hurt the frame, it really, knocked this thing out of commission. And the car sat for about 15 years. When Freddie got the urge to get the car back on the road, he contacted my dad, Troy Bird, to do the fiberglass work and whatever it was going to take to get this thing fixed and painted and back on the road. So they put a one-piece front end on it, just aftermarket front end. The headlight assemblies were destroyed, so they put square headlights out of a Chevy Monza in the grill, and just basically went from there back to kind of graft everything in. And while they were getting this thing ready to paint, Freddie had an engine built by Jim Connor. It was a 350 with a B&M blower, and this thing, by the time it was ready to go, this car was brand new front to back. My dad painted this car the day before I was born, and he used DuPont Imron materials in medium blue. They had kind of a limited color palette, but he used medium blue, which is about the closest thing you could get to the car's original silver blue. And just, in the process of restoring it, my dad had let him know that if he ever decided to sell it, to just, give him first shot at it. And that's exactly what Freddie did. The moment he decided it was time to let it go, my dad's house was the first place he stopped. And, they worked out a deal. It was kind of a trade on some money and trading out a paint job on another car. And, they made it work for each other. And, my dad, it's not like he was a wealthy man. He really had to kind of scrounge up some money to make this deal work. So to give you a quick timeline of the Corvette, when my dad bought it, he didn't love the hood scoop. Even though he had just made it, he just didn't love the design. So he did away with the hood and put a Mr. Gasket scoop on top of the carburetor. And he later put a hood on it, just cut a big hole in it. He didn't love the stance, the big 8-inch wide rallies all the way around wasn't really his style, so he put some skinnies on the front, lowered the front suspension down, but other than that, that was kind of the immediate changes. He also just swapped to some regular black wall tires. He didn't really like the raised white letters, and that was pretty much it. It was ready to hit the road from there. Just a quick detail about these pictures that my dad shot in 1987. The grass that the car is sitting on, that was eventually where my dad built his garage. And oddly enough, at the time we didn't live there. The house was owned by my aunt and uncle. And a couple years later, my dad bought the place and then built a garage right there. And I just thought it was cool that the picture was taken right there where his garage would later be. And you can see our house in the background on a couple of the shots. And then you can actually see another house in the distance, and that's where my wife and I lived when we first got married. So that's kind of cool to look at these pictures and see some of those things that bring back a lot of memories. So at that time, I was about 1 year old, and my dad was looking for something to hand down to me eventually. And this was the thing that was going to mean a lot. It was going to be a really good incentive for when I got older. And if you knew my dad, you would know that this was rare for him to hold on to a car for this long. Most of the time, if he buys a car, his intent is to sell it. And whether he's fixing it up and trying to make a little bit of money on it, or whatever the case is, he usually buys something in order to turn around and sell it. So for him to hold on to this car for so long, it was really meaningful. It meant a lot to me. Even as a young kid, I realized that he passed up an opportunity to double and triple his money just so he could give me this car. Just riding in this car as a kid, I mean, it was, it was one of those things that you felt like you had the fastest car in town. And even as I got older, as a teenager, I felt the same way, and finally kind of snapped into reality. The thing that did it was the dyno. When I took it to the dyno for the first time, I realized that this car wasn't the fastest thing in town, and nowhere close, actually. So anyways, that was just a little bit of a real moment. So fast forward to when I turned 16, my dad gave me this car, and he didn't want me to just take off driving it without him, which I don't blame him, because at the time it still had the B&M blower on it, still, pretty rowdy little street car. And he rode with me for probably the first 10 months or a year that I drove it. And it's not like I was driving it to school every day. It was just, special occasions, or run to town, or go drive to a little cruise in or something like that. But it was really, it was a good learning lesson for me to drive with him, because at the time it still had a 4-speed in it. The shifter was a little bit wore out, so it could get hung up in between gears, and it was just one of those things. It was good to have my dad with me. But once I started driving on my own, I started coming up with some ideas of what the car needed to be more practical and to be more fun and faster, and something I can enjoy a little bit more. So that's the wheels kind of started turning when I was about 18, and as the years went on, I started gathering some parts together and getting some ideas of what I wanted to do. And currently, the car, it has a 327 in it. It's not the original one. It's got flat top pistons, pretty basic motor. It's 40 over, just cast crank, that sort of thing. It's got a set of Dart Pro 1 200cc heads on it, a comp hydraulic roller camshaft. The intake is a Dart dual plane. It matches the heads. And then a Holley 650 double pumper on top. It's got a set of Hedman headers on it, Flowmaster mufflers. The transmission is a big thing that I upgraded. It's got a Tremec TKO 600 overdrive, and that has saved this car. With the 411 rear end, it was not a car that you could drive very far without it overheating, and the 5-speed has saved it. I mean, I can drive it pretty much anywhere I want to go. One thing that gets a lot of attention with this car is the tire and wheel combination. It's something that people didn't understand at first when I did it, because the car always either had Corvette rallies on it or weld drag lights. I had weld rod lights on it for a while, but I got this idea to make it look like a 70s style street racer type car. So my original mismatched wheel combination was a set of 15 by 4.5 US Indy slotted mags on the front and just some black steel wheels on the back, just plain old black wheels. And people, no one got it, no one understood, especially local people. They were like, what are you doing? Because I took a set of shiny weld wheels off of it and put this weird mismatched thing. So after a few years, it kind of started to catch on, and more people started doing it. Not saying that I started a trend, but that, you know, people started recognizing that this was a way to make a car look like a nostalgia drag car. My favorite combination is the Rocket Strike with a set of Firestone bias ply tires on the front and just regular old 15 by 6 black steel wheels on the back with a set of M&H slicks. And that's what drives the best and what looks the coolest, and it really fits the car. So the body, as you can tell, it's got primer spots on it. It's not perfect by any means, and as I mentioned earlier, the car had been wrecked and repaired several times. So, you know, there's some stuff on here that I've patched up over the years. Just if there's a crack or a blister or a bubble or something that comes up, I'll fix it and put some primer on it. But I don't have any real intentions of painting it anytime soon. It's, you know, that's not a priority right now. The priority is just enjoying it and keeping it running, keeping all the parts in good shape. And so that's kind of slowed down the process of making it actually look good. I did redo the interior recently. I put new carpet. My Uncle Joe helped me with some seat covers. Redid the console. Fixed the heater, which the heater cord had been busted for 30 years, and I finally got that fixed. So, you know, I'm just kind of inching my way towards this car being nicer. So the best memory in this car, I've got to say, is I think I was 9 or 10 years old. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and he came in and got me. He said, put some clothes on, we're going to town. So here I am, this little kid, strapped into the passenger seat of this car, and we're about to street race. And it was just a surreal moment. And the car was a little Vega station wagon. And I don't remember personally, but from what I've gathered from other people's stories, the car had a 406 in it with nitrous and pretty strong little street car. All I remember is both cars spinning the tires a lot, and Dad running through the gears like he always would. And finally, about third gear, the car hooked up pretty good, and we passed him in third, and he hit fourth and pulled away. And you know, we go back to where everybody's hanging out, and the guy in the Vega and the guy who was riding with him didn't agree that we had outrun him based on what RPM he was turning. He thought he had gone through the 8th mile ahead of us. So anyways, who knows? I wish we had GoPro cameras back then, because we'd be able to tell. That was a life-changing moment. I mean, as a kid, I loved cars. I was around them all the time. But that race, that night, changed it all. Another great memory is giving my soon-to-be mother-in-law a ride in the Corvette the night before I got married. For our rehearsal dinner, Christina had planned a surprise cruise-in for me, just to kind of take the edge off, because she knew I didn't like the idea of being in a wedding, so this was a good way to relax and hang out with some car people. And so I drove the Corvette to this deal, and when we were all cleaned up and done, Christina's mom asked if she could go for a ride. And I was like, sure, yeah, let's do it. So we took off down through town, and I took a ride on Main Street and hammered on it pretty hard, and I ended up getting pulled over. The police officer saw everything that I did, so there was no arguing it. And he said, as his wedding present to me, that instead of reckless driving, he was going to give me 45 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone. So yay. But you know, regardless of that, Christina's mom was still very upset, and I told her, sitting there on the side of the road, I said, I don't care how much this costs, this is worth it. A story like this, you can't make this stuff up. So whatever it costs, it was worth it for us to have this memory right here. I also like to give my little girl rides in the Corvette, just to kind of plant that seed, kind of like the way my dad did with me. And you know, we started that pretty early. She was just a couple months old. We took her to our local cruise-in and strapped her in there as best we could. Did all the right things as far as safety goes. And I put a GoPro camera in there and kind of captured our experience. And I ended up posting that to YouTube and kind of got a little bit of hate mail because of it, because I kind of got on it a little bit. But I wanted her to experience that, and you know, it didn't hurt anything. I just kind of barely rolled into it.
Are you gonna go for a ride?
No way.
Yeah, we're gonna go for a ride. What car is this?
It's Corvette.
That's right.
What did they do? Corvette.
Yeah, the Corvette.
All right. Bye-bye.
But anyways, as the years have gone on, I've gotten more comfortable with going a little faster, hitting the gears a little harder with her. And there for a while she hated it because it was loud when I would get on it. But now she's getting a little more used to it, and we're starting to have some fun with it. Alright, I'm going to try to hit second gear like Papa used to. Yeah. I'm not real good at it, so we'll see how it goes.
Gonna drive it with Papa.
Mm-hmm.
So we need it clean and shiny.
Yep.
For him, so he'll know it we did it.
Mm-hmm.
This hope he likes it.
I've got a lot to be thankful for. I mean, I've got a dad who raised me around these cars and you know, kind of brought me up to embrace this hobby and lifestyle. And, you know, I was fortunate enough to have a dad who gave me a 1964 Corvette. I mean, that just, you know, who does that? And it's not like my dad is wealthy. I mean, this is something that he worked extremely hard for. And, you know, it means a lot to me. It especially does now that I'm getting older, got a kid of my own. You know, I want to do those types of things for her. And I know exactly how hard he had to work to make that happen. So it's really cool to look back and think about some of the memories from this car and think about the memories that I'll make in the future. So I just wanted to share that. I've got plenty of other great stories of old cars. I've got a pretty good collection here in my shop, but my dad's also got a cool collection, and I plan to showcase more of that in the future. So if you like this sort of thing, feel free to hit the subscribe button and follow along on some of our car journeys and adventures, and check us out later. Thank you for watching.